Welcome to episode 7 of the Modern Agile Show. I am delighted to have my first guest. I told him a minute ago that he's my first guest. He's like, what? Yeah, so you're my first guest. This is Jez Humble. Jez,
hi.
Welcome to the Modern Agile Show.
Thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure to have you here. Jez and I we're neighbors, aren't we?
Basically.
We live in neighboring communities in the East Bay of California.
East Bay.
East Bay, we love it. Jez is the author and co-author of 3 books. The first one, Continuous Delivery, an absolutely outstanding book that just paved the way for an entire new industry in DevOps. The second book, which we have here and we're going to be looking at later, Lean Enterprise. Very, very important book. Lean Enterprise. You gave me a copy of that book, and I've been reading it ever since. And a brand new book, which just came out. When did it come out?
Like in October.
October, called the Devops Handbook. So that is incredible. Jez also is a guest lecturer at UC Berkeley.
Mm-hmm. And I work at 18F.
What is 18F?
18F is one of the things that came out of the healthcare.gov debacle. 18F is a team within the General Services Administration in the US government. And we are a digital agency, basically, to help other agencies in government build in a lean, agile way. Fantastic.
Unbelievable. All right, so that's extremely cool. Applying lean and agile to government, helping make that actually happen so we actually have a efficient government.
That's the plan.
That's incredible. Okay, so you might have noticed this. We don't normally have this type of thing here, but I was just at a special place here right down the block from my office. It's the Sierra Nevada Tasting Room, and it's where Sierra Nevada tests out brand new beers on people. So it's their laboratory, and it's right down the block. And I thought, wouldn't it be great, since you're coming, to have a little refreshment?
That's a fabulous idea. I'm very happy.
So
we're not allowed to have booze in government offices, so you know.
Okay, well, this is industrial logic. We can do whatever we want. So let me tell you about the beer real quick.
Okay.
This is called Baltic Joy.
Right.
It's a porter with coconut and almonds.
Sounds great.
So would you like a glass then?
Sure.
You are from England,
I
so
am.
you are used to some very good brews. I'm hoping that this lives up to it. And let's see how it goes here. This is a growler, as they call it.
I didn't know about growlers until I came to California.
Yeah. And you're going to drink it out of a Sierra Nevada glass.
Perfect.
Just acquired. Here we are.
That's good. That was perfect, Josh. It's like you've done this before.
I haven't. I really haven't.
You're establishing a precedent now. You're going to have to do this for all your guests.
Oh my God.
All right, it's going to get expensive. Cheers.
Cheers.
To Modern Agile.
Thank you. And thank you for being the first guest on the show. It's truly an honor to have you here.
It's a pleasure.
So, a lot of times on the show we talk about, modern agile things. You are obviously familiar. I've just given you a refrigerator magnet.
Yeah, and there's 4 great things on this.
Excellent.
Make people awesome at the top. Love that. Deliver value continuously. Can't object to that, clearly. Make safety a prerequisite. And I know you've published on engineering, which is your movement around creating safety, which I think is tremendously important. And then experimenting and learning rapidly, which is, I think this and making safety a prerequisite are they're the final frontier of Agile, really, in many ways.
Yeah, experimenting and learning, and then of course what you wrote about, which is deliver value continuously.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that if you can't get the value in the customer's hands, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what it's all about.
Right, and if you can't do that continuously, you can't experiment. I mean, if it takes you a month to get your change into production, you're not going to be able to experiment realistically. So I think the one enables the other. Yeah, and what are you finding with continuous deployment these days? What have you learned, for example, since the book came out on continuous delivery? The continuous delivery book. I've learned I wasn't crazy, which is always nice.
You're not.
And everyone's doing it now. You're hard pressed to find people who either aren't doing it or don't think they should be doing it, or say they're doing it but aren't doing it. Everyone either says they're doing it or wants to say they're doing it.
Right.
So that's good, and we're finding it everywhere. I mean, And I bang on incessantly about Gary Griever and his HP LaserJet firmware case studies. So we're doing it in firmware, we're doing it in the government. One of the things that I'm working on, but there's a team working on at 18F, is cloud.gov, which is a cloud platform for government, platform as a service built using Cloud Foundry, sitting on AWS. And we're doing continuous delivery of that. I mean, there's pipelines set up. We're deploying the platform continuously. So even in government, where we have this crazy regulation, there's over 100 controls just to deploy a low impact system in federal government. We're doing continuous delivery.
Incredible. So you got incredibly bureaucratic government stuff where you're doing continuous delivery, and firmware, where people don't think you can do it in firmware. Right. Because firmware, that's hardware. That's the software on the hardware. Right. And people are actually continuously deploying safely to it. Right. So that's a little dangerous, right?
Yeah, I mean, and also, you wouldn't think it would be a good domain because people don't want to update their firmware 10 times a day. But it turns out the efficiencies in terms of the economics of the software development process, it's tremendously important there. It improves quality. I mean, all these things that we talk about, the fact that it's not just a trade-off of quality versus speed. These things enable each other, and you can get better quality and cheaper and faster. So I think like my thing is, no excuses. If you're building a website, no whining about continuous delivery.
Oh, there you go. It's table stakes at this point, right? You just have to do it. So. Well, very good. And then we have this make people awesome, which is our high bar. Right. I mean, that's sort of the, wow, yes, deliver stuff continuously, but actually steer it towards doing something awesome. Yep. Doing something incredible for them. Yep. Which is again, it's a great challenge. I talk about Kathy Sierra quite a bit, talking about make users awesome. Yep. And then we look at the whole internal systems of how do we interact with each other? How do we make each other awesome? Yep. By being respectful and so forth. So,
I mean, Kathy Sierra is amazing. I love her book. It's on the reading list for my class at UC Berkeley. Yeah. I think make people awesome in terms of your users, and make people awesome in terms of the people, your employees or your team. That's a kind of duality that hadn't occurred to me when I spotted that. I really love that. That's great.
I feel it's really hard to accomplish too. I mean, let's be real here, right? This is hard. Awesome well, the Brits sometimes say awesome and roll their eyes, right? I mean, so I've heard this, that awesome is not necessarily, how we Americans think of it, but
yeah, Brits tend to use words like that ironically.
Ironically, yes.
But I've had that knocked out of me. I've been in California for 8 years now.
So we mean it in terms of awe-inspiring, just absolutely incredible. Make people incredible, make people amazing, that kind of thing.
It's not a middle-of-the-road term. I mean, it's very clearly on one end of a spectrum.
Right.
And I think this is right. I mean, people think that, we talk about this at the beginning of the book. A lot of people think you have to hire awesome people. This is what we need to do. We need to hire the awesome people, and that's what will make us great.
Yes.
And that's not true. Yeah. You get awesome people by building an awesome environment. And I mean, I remember Adrian Cockcroft very famously. So if you don't know Adrian Cockcroft, he basically was the first person to do cloud computing at enormous scale at Netflix, invented a bunch of the patterns that are used to do huge systems in cloud stuff. Yeah. And some senior person at a Fortune 500 company said to Adrian, "Where do you get your amazing people from, Adrian?" And he turned around to him and said, "We get them from you." And it's this idea that it's not about hiring awesome people; it's about creating an environment which nurtures people and allows them to learn and gain new skills. Yes. I didn't do CS. Yeah. I never, I learned this stuff by experimenting and trying stuff out.
You have a liberal arts background, philosophy background.
Yeah, well, so my undergraduate was philosophy and physics. My postgraduate degree, I've got a master's in musicology, where I studied Indian classical music and learned Hindi. So nothing remotely computer related. Right. It's all self-taught basically.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And I think anyone can do that. We talk in here, and I know you talk a lot about agile mindset and the importance of mindset, Carol Dweck's work, the idea that all of us are capable of learning, and basically creating an environment where anyone can learn. That's what we're trying to do, not this idea that innately people are smart or dumb and that we have to hire the smart ones.
Yeah, I mean, people are. I basically what I found in growing up through school was that if a teacher had high impressions of me, I rose to those impressions, and if a teacher had low impressions of me, I would meet those expectations too. So it's amazing, exactly what you're saying. It's the environment that is created that really forms us. So have high expectations for your people and create an environment that lets them thrive. Easier said than done, though. There's a lot of this stuff we talk about. I mean, I work with large institutions that are struggling mightily to actually implement this stuff. And your book on enterprise lean, or the lean enterprise, is basically helping companies work through all that stuff, right?
That's the plan.
Yeah. Well, I know it's filled. This book is filled with incredible wisdom.
Thank you.
From lots of people, and you've culled it down into an amazing collection of wisdom. I saw all of the modern agile principles in here as I read this.
Yep.
I saw incredible, quotes from Deming and Taiichi Ono and all these great thinkers.
Carol Dweck. We talked about mindset.
Absolutely. So, are there any passages you want to read today for us?
Yeah, I've picked one out on short notice, which I think is reasonable. Before I read it, I just want to say, these are not my ideas, and in fact, we get.
You have two co-authors.
I have two co-authors as well, but even the bits that are mine are not my idea. I think we got dinged for this on Amazon, but I'm unapologetic about it. I mean, this is basically me. I mean, we tried to implement continuous delivery, and we found that the problems were not technical. The problems were cultural and organizational and architectural. And so I basically did a ton of research and then, visited a bunch of different companies. You invited me in to help them implement continuous delivery. And this is basically, what I learned in that journey.
Wow.
And this is where I keep all the things I need to remember, basically. So it's like if I need to, there's quotes and stuff, I've tried to stick them all in here so that I can just find the things that I need.
That's fascinating. So you literally wrote this book because after writing continuous delivery, companies would say, well, we can't do that.
Right.
And you would say, oh, okay, why? And then ultimately the answers came in this book.
Right, exactly. And in fact, that's just caused me to change the thing that I'm gonna read.
All right. Well, I will stall. I'm going to fill up. I'm going to give you more beer as your.
I need to drink quicker. So this is one thing that I've also lost from England is the ability to get beer down my face.
I should tell you this: that Jez biked to my office today, and so I'm very impressed with your biking.
Thanks.
I'm
not dead yet. And after cycling in London, actually, this is relatively straightforward. I cycled around London for a few years. Although I did get this eye injury from basically cycling down a hill in the UC campus, totally unforced error. I just literally cycled into the sidewalk and then over the handlebars, smacked my head, and now I've got this quite dangerous looking scar, which I think makes me probably look quite tough. So here's what we say at the end of chapter 1 in a section called "Your people are your competitive advantage."
Your people are your competitive advantage. Okay.
A key premise of this book, supported by the experience of companies such as Tesla, among many others, is that the flexibility provided by software can, when correctly leveraged, accelerate the innovation cycle. Software can provide your enterprise with a competitive advantage by enabling you to search for new opportunities and execute valid opportunities faster than the competition. Many people working in enterprises believe that there's some essential difference between them and tech giants such as Google, Amazon, or Netflix that are held up as examples of technology done right. We often hear, that wouldn't work here. That may be right, but people often look in the wrong places for the obstacles that prevent them from improving. Skeptics often treat size, regulation, perceived complexity, legacy technology, or some other special characteristic of the domain in which they operate as a barrier to change. The purpose of this chapter, this book, is to show that while these obstacles are indeed challenges, the most serious barrier is to be found in organizational culture, leadership, and strategy.
Culture, leadership, and strategy.
And I guess I would probably add architecture as well.
Okay. So basically you're saying they cannot necessarily say, we're not, just because we're not Google doesn't mean we get a free pass.
Right.
They just need to focus on those areas. Culture.
Right. Yeah, no one gets to say, it can't be done here. I mean, it can't, they're right in one sense, I think. You can't take what someone else has done and transplant it into your system and expect the same results. You know, you can't, the kind of copy-paste approach to process improvement.
Yes.
I mean, you know, we talk about the scaled agile frameworks in this book, and I know you have opinions about those frameworks that I probably share. So we talked about this over beers before.
Yes.
But the idea that you can, you know, take a framework and implement it, and that's going to fix everything.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it doesn't. But of course, there are things that we have discovered over time that I do copy paste. For example, trunk-based development.
Okay.
Right. I mean, of course, a lot of the clients we go to, they're like, branch hell. There's all these branches. Mm-hmm. And they think that that's actually the right way to work, and they've been taught that way. And it's like, you know, things could be a lot simpler if you just all committed regularly into the trunk. And I don't view that as like copy-paste. Like Google does it, Instagram does it, a whole bunch of great companies do it. Hell, we do it at Industrial Logic. And it's not that hard. It's not hard at all. In fact, it's really simple. But, you know, so are there things that are universal that aren't necessarily like, you know, oh, copy paste and it won't work, but are there universals?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I struggle with this myself because on the one hand, I'm like, there's no such thing as best practice. On the other hand, the most controversial thing that I talk about even today is trunk-based development, working off trunk instead of feature branches. I regularly get dinged for this.
Yes, I've heard this. I was actually at a credit card company and I mentioned this and they're like, oh yeah, Jez was beating us up about that.
I was. And it's my hot button. So well done, you found my hot button.
I didn't know that. I'm amazing. I have, so this is my first interview and I've somehow honed in on something critical here.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you have the same problem I do, which is that you say you should do this, and people are like, that's crazy talk, it can't work. And you can divide the population of developers into two: the people who think, of course, why wouldn't you do that, and the rest of them who are like, this is crazy talk, it can't possibly work. And it's very rare to find people like people are really polarized.
They are
about this issue.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we've done research on this. State of DevOps report, we've been doing research with me, Jean, Nicole, in our new company, DevOps Research and Assessment, LLC, where we're doing basic scientific research on what works and what doesn't work in terms of software development and IT performance.
Scientific research on what works and what doesn't work. This is like, that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really thrilled, and I have to give most of the credit to Nicole Forsgren, Dr. Nicole Forsgren, my business partner.
Dr. Nicole.
Nicole Forsgren.
I met her in Singapore like a month or so ago. She's brilliant.
Yeah, she's a proper scientist. She's a real professor. She actually has like a PhD and has done like proper research. And so as you know, we've tried to find a scientific approach to kind of things that we talk about. It's really hard. You can't run randomized controlled experiments in the context of software development because there's too many variables, right?
Too many variables.
So what we do is basically we take a hypothesis-based approach and we look at the data. And when you start with the hypotheses and you have theory that you can point to say, well, we expect this to happen, then what you can say is, well, where we see correlations and we predict those correlations, we can talk about causation. So there's three situations in science where you can talk about causation. One is longitudinal studies, which you can't do. One is randomized controlled experiments, which are very hard. And the other one is where it's theory-based. So you use theory to predict what you think will happen. And then if the correlations come through, you can say that it's causal. So that's what we've done. And we've shown that on teams where there's less than 3 long-lived branches, where typically you push branches into trunk once a day, or more frequently, trunk or master or whatever you call it, those teams have higher IT performance. And we expect that because what happens when you keep inventory on branches is that it goes stale. And then, you know, if you and I are working together, I push into trunk, it's fine, you can merge my changes. But, you know, if there's 3, 4, 5, I mean, the complexity, and that's a combinatorial problem, merging all those different people into trunk. And the more people you have, and the longer lived those branches are, that's a non-linear problem of getting all those things merged.
So you're correlating a low frequency of branching, that is not branching very often, emerging into trunk early and often, to higher IT performance.
Correct.
How do you measure that?
So we have 2 measures. We have fact, we have 4. So, but 2 categories: throughput and stability.
Throughput and stability. Okay.
Throughput is release frequency and time from check-in to release, lead time.
Okay.
And stability is time to restore service. When there's a outage or a failure degradation, how long does it take to restore service? And change fail rate. When you push a change to production, what percentage of the time do you do an emergency fix or roll back?
Sure.
And what we found, which is fascinating, is that high performers do better on both. It's not a zero-sum game, as we talked about earlier.
Wow.
High performers have better stability and better throughput because a lot of the practices we talk about, like version control and test automation and deployment automation, those help you with throughput and stability.
Sure.
And so what we can show is that, you know, having short-lived branches where you push into trunk regularly predicts higher IT performance.
Wow. So that's awesome, and that's a scientific, research, analyzed discovery across numerous cases.
Yeah, we have like more than 20,000 data points.
My God!
And so it's an order of magnitude higher than you need for demonstrating statistical significance. So the power of the study is really strong. And so our offering DevOps Research and Assessment, our product is we go into your company, we compare you against the baseline of the data we've gathered over the 3 years of doing the study. So we were in Capital One. So Tupul Pal, who's a cloud architect at Capital One, did a talk at DevOps Enterprise a couple of weeks ago where he talked about the work we did there. We helped them analyze what they were doing. And in fact, out of all the different things we measured, trunk-based development was the thing where we identified they had the most room for improvement.
Wow.
By moving to a trunk-based development model, they achieved a 20x increase in IT performance as a result of just doing that one thing.
Awesome.
20x.
This is music to my ears. I mean, talk about delivering value continuously. If you're not in the trunk, you're not getting into production anytime soon. You're in a branch.
Right.
I mean, this is what it's all about. Why do people have such a hard time with simplicity? With the simplicity of just doing these basic practices. What is the problem?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be mean about developers, but
No.
I will. Because I'm a developer. I'm a developer full time, so I feel like I'm somewhat being mean about myself.
You keep your hands dirty, by the way. We talked about this before the show started.
I do.
Jez is one of these people that keeps his hands dirty. He's building government systems, right? I mean, you're deep inside there. You're not just like, basically handing commands off to programmers. You're in there.
Yeah, I want to make sure that people seem to find it unusual that I still write code. They're always surprised. You must get this too, because I know that you're a coder too.
I love
you still
to
code.
I love to code. I like to keep my hands dirty, and yet I'll talk to executives too. So it's like they're like, how can you do both?
Right.
And it's just like, well, I mean, it's like riding a bike. I mean, you're just used to doing that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's important.
But
right?
do you get the same thing that I'm like, oh, I'm still writing code. People are like, really?
Really?
As if
You've got gray in your beard. You shouldn't be writing code.
That's impossible.
But in fact, it's what keeps us real. It keeps us close to the metal, and we understand, like, well, what does it take to be really good? Because you can't be all a theorist,
right?
A theoretician,
right?
Where you haven't touched any actual code in a while. You don't,
a methodologist.
A methodologist. Oh my Lord. Okay, so
let's drink to not being methodologists.
Oh right, I love that.